Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar titled Governance Guardianship Spotlight on Internal Controls under SCA Regulation. We want to inform you before we begin this webinar that this session is recorded. We have muted your microphones and switched off the cameras so as to avoid any disturbance during the webinar. However, we want you to remain engaged through our chat window. We would encourage you to post any queries that you have in our chat window with the name of the panelist to whom the question is intended. Now, I would like to hand over this presentation to the host of this webinar, Mr. Rajiv Batra. Over to you, Rajiv. Rajiv, sorry, could you unmute yourself?
Thank you, Asmita. Good morning and sabal khair to everybody. My name is Rajiv Batra. I'm a partner of risk advisory practice in KPMG, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today. The topic, which I think is a subject which is very topical, and it's quite evident from the number of people who are already dialing in, and I'm sure more will dial in. I think the topic we are covering with the next 60 minutes is something which is, as I mentioned, very topical, talking about internal controls and internal governance relating to the SCA regulation. Now, this is an important topic, as I mentioned to you, and the way we structure our discussion today is to split in two parts. The first 20 minutes will be a presentation very briefly to clarify the new amendments to the SCA regulation and the governance code. And the second part is where we will have our expert panels coming in, talking about giving more clarity. The predominant objective of this webinar is twofold. Number one is to provide more information and clarification on the amendments to the governance code, and also probably talk more about the how this actually in the journey of implementation we all are in together, and how the implementation will happen. Before I move to the presentation, I want like to outline one premise with which I think we have thought through this presentation to see the success of every company is built on the foundation of internal control. So every successful company has internal control framework and internal control environment already existing. So what this we need to do is what more is needed to be able to ensure that we can demonstrate the compliance to the SCA requirements of internal controls. Moving on, uh, in the presentation, I'm being supported by my colleagues who are well experienced in this domain. For example, Nigar, who spent enormous amount of time in assisting organizations comply to the internal control reporting requirements, and a very seasoned partner, Richard Ackland, audit partner, who's seen this journey right through the Sarbanes-Oxley to the ADA resolution, and now with the SCA regulations coming through. So we will have the immense experience of my colleagues talking through in the presentation, giving you the what and the how of internal control environment implementation in the ASCA. I would like to introduce the panel members at this point in time. Again, extremely delighted and privileged to have two eminent panel members and my partner colleague Sudhir joining for the expert panel for the meeting. Again, sincere gratitude to Mohammed Junaid for joining us. Mohammed Junaid, as you can see, is the head of corporate governance section in SKA. And I'm sure, Mohammed, you have been very busy, and despite that, you sparing the time is your reaffirmation and the regulators' reaffirmation that you are partnering with us and the organization in the journey to comply to the corporate governance and the internal controls. I also like to express my gratitude to Luisa, who's our partner joining in from KPMG Germany. She's our partner in corporate governance services and an audit partner. But I think more importantly, Luisa brings her experience as a SOX lead for our KPMG for EMA practice. So what we are hoping and looking at, Luisa, to share her experiences how companies globally, internationally have implemented and dealt with this journey of internal control and the ICOFAR implementation. Richard I've already introduced, and finally joining the panel is my colleague partner Sudhir. And when I was thinking on how to introduce Sudhir, and I felt he's a young veteran, young because obviously is young, and veteran because he's seen the UAE for 2 decades in this profession with the firm more than 2 decades, and has seen and helped clients in the journey of ICOFAR internal controls and corporate governance implementation. So we're looking forward to Sudhir's coming the inputs and experiences in the UAE. Now, moving on to the presentation, if I may, and as I said, our intent is to make sure this session remains as engaging as possible. So, we will try to manage the time to limit the presentation to 20 minutes. Uh, as we talk through the presentation, I just want to re-emphasize the fact, though we as consultants have experience working and advising clients, but we are always learning, and hence our learning happens through your questions. So I strongly encourage to use the chat box for your questions wherever through this process. It's unfortunate that we will not be able to see you, hear you directly, which as my colleague Asmita indicated, is to make sure that we have less distractions, but we want to hear from you, and hence please post as many questions as possible, and it will be our sincere endeavor to cover as much in the panel session. And the presentation, please don't take notes. Feel free to take notes, but the presentation slides will be emailed to you, so you will have access to all the content of the presentation which is being shown. Now, coming to the presentation part, and as I said, we have split this presentation in 3 sections. The section one, which I'm going to talk about, is briefly touching upon the internal control regulatory landscape specific to ESCA. We will then move on to the how, which my colleague Nigar will talk through. And finally, Richard will come in to give his external audit perspective, because we do know there is a requirement of external auditors to provide an opinion on the internal control effectiveness as one of the requirements. This slide speaks on itself. It clearly says the regulatory landscape of internal control is not new. It's been there. Regulators have been doing that, and even in the UAE, if you go back last 7 or 8 years, starting with 2017 of the ADA resolution where ICOFAR was mandated, moving to the Insurance Authority or the CBUAE where financial services sector was asked for the same implementation, with 2020 ADA Securities and Commodities Authority coming up with the ESCA regulation, and the recent amendments of January. So clearly there is an emphasis and importance expected of the regulators of implementing a good control environment, predominantly with the reason to improve the stakeholders' confidence, or strengthen the investor confidence through quality of financial reporting, quality of accuracy, bringing greater accountability, and I think for the benefit of the organization, helping organizations successful. As I keep repeating, all of this, what we are doing is to enhance and secure the organization's success. If Mushima, if you can move to the next slide. Uh, the next slide is a brief synopsis. This is not everything which the amendments talk about, but this is a brief synopsis, and I want to keep it a little high level so that when we come to the panel, we have more questions to talk about. But if I bring the emphasis on what has predominantly changed during the amendments, there are 5 or 6 bullets, which in the center part of the slide you can all see. Uh, uh, the governance code along with the amendments have become effective, and they are effective for all companies year ending June 30th and 2024 onwards. But the key changes are about board composition, which brings independence on the board. Majority of the board need to be independent. Greater accountability has been enforced on board obligations with regards to internal control framework, with regards to internal control environment, and reporting on how they are fulfilling their obligations. There is a change in the related party definition. I think what is also very important to talk about is the last 3 bullets, which are new, and especially the audit committee report and the governance committee report. The audit committee is now obligated to demonstrate through a report of the activities they've undertaken, and which includes evaluating controls, evaluating financial statements, and reporting on major issues, and reporting deficiencies, and providing a view on how they are overseeing the internal audit and internal control performance. And finally, the last 2 points talking about the governance committee, which is a committee which has been which the board could set to oversee the compliance of the ESCA's the regulatory requirements. And one of the other requirements of this governance committee is to make sure that they are supporting the board, the board of directors in fulfilling their requirements and updating the board of new and leading regulations. And finally, on the external auditors, I think we will seek more clarifications from Junaid, where Mohammed Junaid is about. There is an expectation of external auditors to provide an assurance and opinion on the effectiveness of internal control. At this point in time, it is stated as may, and I'm sure Mohammed will provide us more clarity on this. So as I said, these are just a high-level synopsis. The scans are available for you to download, but we'll talk more about this in the subsequent sections. At this stage, I would probably, Shivam, we will move quickly to the implementation phase. This is I spoke about from a mandate perspective, but if I now hand this over to my colleague Nigar, as I said, I've outlined for you the what, and we will now move to how. Uh, this slide, before I hand this over to Nigar, is largely because we all familiar with ADA. I think it's a reference to ADA, and if I summarize in one sentence how the SCA regulation is a bit different, I think ADA focused on financial reporting control. ADA goes beyond financial reporting to cover the internal control. So over to you, Nigar, and if you'll take us through the what, the how of the implementation.
Thanks, Rajiv, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to have you all on this webinar. As Rajiv mentioned, after covering the what, I think the question that all of us have in our mind is how do we go about it? How do we navigate this journey to ensure that, we meet the expectations of the stakeholders, which is the board of directors, as well as of SCA as a regulator, which is enforcing good governance and internal control in the UAE. So to start with, I think the key question is how do we institutionalize it in our organization? We've all been running organization, and I'm sure at one point in our discussions around governance, risk, and compliance, we've all been asked, we've all seen the diagram, which is, the 3 lines model. And as we look at it today and we have our mandate on internal control, we ask ourselves, how do I bucket my operations in this 3 lines model? Where do I start? How do I get things done? So basically, the philosophy around the 3 lines model is the clarity, is the clear accountability, as well as the clarity on reporting, which happens from the first and the second line to the senior management, and the third line, which happens directly to the board and audit committee. So basically, if you look at your organization today, who are the first liners? Who are those who are running, who are in the front seat of operating the company? So basically, here you have all those who are running the operations. They are the one who are owning the task. They are the one who are implementing the control. And thereby, you see the first line operating in a very close collaboration of the second line, which is mostly housing the risk and compliance function. And today, as we talk about it, the internal control function. And the internal control function, in a way, it works as a guidance to organizations when it comes to, what are the procedures that I need to implement? What are the controls that I need to implement? There is a new regulation. How do I bring it as a standard in my organization? So these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves as we go on this journey. How do I institutionalize it? And what are the key mandates and key tasks I'm going to give to my internal control department to enable this internal control framework? And the internal control department acts like works in tandem with the first line and the third line, because the internal control department provides the first line with all the guidance and the support, while they enable the third line of defense to give what we refer to as the independent assurance, so that the board and the committee members are able to exercise the independent oversight. And on this point, there is one aspect that I really want to emphasize, because in this part of the world, organizations, depending on their maturity, there is a very blurred line of accountability between the first line, the second line, and in some cases between the second and the third line, whereby sometimes internal audit is looking into the risk management, is looking into fraud and compliance, so on and so forth. But then if we go back to the SCA, today the internal audit is supposed to be independent, not involved at all in the second line, in the first line to exercise this independence. So moving on next, now that we've understood how do we institutionalize it, what is the ambit of internal control? Because if you look at internal control and we take an organization, it runs from the whole value chain of it. But then how do we define our scope? How do we define our ambit? We have guiding principles, we have frameworks. And I'm sure most of you guys must have come across frameworks like COBIT, frameworks like COCO, and I think the most used framework, which has been leveraged on the different regulations across the globe, has been COSO. And what's interesting about COSO is COSO enables us as management to provide a guide and to put a structure to our value chain. So basically, if we look at the cube, it is like three-dimensional. It clearly shows to you that, if I'm looking at my internal control mandate, I need first to silo it into what is my control environment, what are my risk assessment principles, my control activities, so on and so forth. And once, we've kind of taken your operations, we've bucketed them into this, thereby it enables us as management to meet the requirements of our stakeholders, thereby depicting effectiveness and efficiency of operations by implementing the right performance control, the right scorecard, the right KPIs, ensuring the reliability of reporting. So basically, if we talk about internal control, the end game for internal control is to ensure that the reports, be it financial or non-financial, are reliable, complete, and accurate. And last but not the least is around enabling compliance with laws and regulation. So if we apply the COSO, the key topic here is it enables me to take my organization, bucket it in the cubes that the COSO gives me, and by this, I can define my priorities. How do I go about each of these aspects around defining my internal control mandate? And now that, I've taken my organization and I've put it across my COSO cube, the next task that I need to think about, what are the functions which will be impacted or which will be part of my internal control journey? And thereby, we talk about the finance operation, the operations of a company. Basically, if you are in retail, you're focusing on your retail operation. The compliance, like for financial services, compliance is a big chunk of your internal control. Fraud, and nowadays, I think we cannot implement an internal control framework without thinking about technology, because technology is everywhere. So we've structured it. We know in terms of scope, what are the controls? And then the next question that most of you guys must be asking yourself is, what are the types of control that I need to cover? Because as we start on internal control, the definition is broad, but for us to, as management, to have a step-by-step approach, we need to put an alignment in terms of what are my entity level controls, which in a certain way are the most important aspect because they are the tone at the top. They are pervasive in nature. They set the tone of the organization when it comes to internal control. An example here, what are the components that you guys need to look up to is, do I have a charter for my board? Do I have a delegation of authority matrix? Is there a clarity in terms of my resilience framework? Do I have documented policies and procedures? Because all of this will dictate the extent to which your process level control and your ITAC and your ITGCs will operate. So if we look at the other two components, given the prevalence today of IT system and technology, we cannot dissociate a process level control with an IT general controls or an ITAC. They are very interlinked. And this is whereby the internal control landscape of entities have shifted a lot towards more automated control rather than, process level, or as we refer to manual controls. So process level, hereby I refer to the control that's happening in your procurement. For instance, you have a receipting happening, a physical receipting happening on your procurement. However, the IT general controls refer to the control which will be operating in your procurement, around your procurement system. So basically, how am I managing my logical access? How am I backupping my records, which is happening in my procurement system, so on and so forth. And last but not the least, I think the dependency on ITAC is really important, and we cannot overlook this ITAC as we document our controls when it comes to IC framework. And talking about the documentation, as you all will start with it, internal control implementation comes across as very documentation heavy. But then if we put with hindsight, what we've seen is that if you do a first year implementation, definitely, it requires much more effort, but once you've set the tone, the upcoming years become easier. And I'm going to explain to you how does that happen. So basically, if you start with implementation, you need to scope in, what are the operations, what are your key assets. For a group entity, what are the entities that will be in scope? Potentially, you may end up understanding that there may be entities operating in other GCC operations, but given the materiality and significance to your company, you need to also ensure that the IC framework is operating as intended. When we come to the operations, this is hereby where we use financial and non-financial metrics like your like your ERM framework, like your financial statements to assess what are the processes that will be in scope. And this is whereby those of you who have been part of internal control framework design have a scoping whereby you have your list of operations and you tick as appropriate, which of the entities will cover which operations, so on and so forth. Once we've kind of identified the scoping, it's important why is it important? Because we need to ensure that our internal control cover the risk that matter to me. And the financial is both and the risk hereby is both financial and non-financial. Moving on next, then, you go about the whole documentation. Do I have policies and procedures? And do I have an RCM? And basically, the 3 steps, which is scoping, process documentation, risk and control, these are the 3, I would say, steps that's going to take a significant portion of your time if you go for a first-year implementation. Because once you've laid those foundations, the test of design, the test of effectiveness happens on a recurring basis every year. And your gap remediation, first year, you may end up with a significant number of gaps, but then gradually, as you mature, the number of gaps, reduces. And in terms of timeline, what we've seen is like organization may invest up to 6 to 9 months initially, but then as you start getting nearer, smoother, the timeline becomes more defined. You may end up closing your cycle in 4 months, as well as your number of controls that become in scope. You can start with 400, but then you may end up with a very mature organization with 120. And this is what, the companies which implemented SOX have been doing. And moving on next, once you've kind of worked on your implementation, I think what do we expect as organization to ensure, our internal control is operating as intended? Because as much as it is regulatory driven, it is compliance based, internal control is a lot about bringing organizational excellence. It's a lot about streamlining your processes and control. And how can we do this as an entity is by ensuring that to start with, as management, as a board of directors, we are very clear in terms of our internal control strategy. How do we want to go about it? How are we gonna work out the communication? Once you have your strategy crafted, defined, and signed off by your board of directors and the audit committee, you need to ensure that your internal control framework, as I was saying previously, cover the risks that matter. You kind of ensure that your ELCs, which is a pervasive level control, is implemented across the entity or the group, the way your entity is defined. And one thing that we've seen companies adopting is the extent to which they work towards automating their control as they've embarked their journey of internal control framework definition. So internal control, as you automate it, you will see that in the first year, there is a heavy compliance cost that may come to you, but then this cost is optimized down the line through automation, through a clarity in strategy. And last but not the least, before I hand over to Richard, I think as professionals, when we talk about internal control, we talk a lot about, do you have this documented? Do you have this reference? But there is a very soft element of internal control. And I think this comes with the perspective that, the human executing the control. And this is whereby ensuring that we have the right culture in an organization around control is pivotal because your people, your staff, your team members are responsible to execute it. And this is how, by having the right tone, by ensuring the right behavior, enforcing accountability, we can enable a healthy internal control program. With this, I'll hand over to my colleague Richard for the external audit perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigar. I'll keep this very quick. And it's really very much around. So at the moment, the regulation says we may, as external auditors, issue a separate opinion. I'm going to leave Mohammed Junaid to kind of pick that up very shortly. We already provide some negative assurance on compliance framework and compliance with laws and regulations. Do not underestimate that what this will actually change. I found that during ADA and during SOX, actually things that we may have already been doing, actually there is a step change here in terms of how we go about actually looking at laws and regulations. And so therefore there is more documentation, and the legal department typically kind of takes a step back and say, what are we signing off here? In terms of external auditors, very much risk-based. We're going to be focused on risk-based. At the moment, external auditors do a lot of testing over internal control over financial reporting. Operational controls, i.e. non-financial reporting controls, is not so much done. And therefore, if you're going to go down that route, there needs to be a lot of alignment up front with the auditors to actually kind of agree what will or will not be tested. And I see that more as an ESG assurance type testing than actually a normal financial reporting, internal control of financial reporting. The one takeaway I would give you is whether you think that auditors are an absolute need or a necessary evil, they absolutely have to be all on the journey all the way through. We have something called a no surprise audit as KPMG. No different, no surprise internal control testing. Get your auditors involved up front. Yes, they should be independent, but they will have a view. You need them on board. And with that in mind, I'll hand over to Rajiv to kind of take us through the panel questions, which I'm sure will be insightful.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. And I'll probably request the panel members to maybe come on the screen. I will stop sharing in a 30 seconds. I think I just want to set the tone by saying it's a journey. And I think I want to remind back the point I mentioned when I started. I said, if you are successful, you already have these things in place. What you see on the screen are some of the top lines, headlines, which you as an organization need to assess to see what more do we need to do. But as I said, we'll get onto this conversation more, and maybe I'll stop sharing and come. Can you stop sharing, Shivam? And we probably move to our panel questions. Thank you, and good to see you, my panel, expert panel. And I'll probably start with Mohammed. As I said, I'm sure we, for the benefit of the audience, we took 7-8 minutes more, but still didn't touch a lot on it. And I'm sure everybody is eagerly waiting to hear from you on some of the highlights of the regulation and the amendments. And over to you, Mohammed.
So good afternoon, everyone, and it's my pleasure here to be with you. I can see the attendees are more than 150 people, which seems they're really interested to know much more about the corporate governance, about the internal control and the implementation. So, and I feel that people who are attending now, they want to know much more about the changes that has been done through the corporate governance code and the implementation. So to give you a brief, first of all, about the changes which was done through the corporate governance code, most of the changes was based on the question that you people were asking us, such as, for example, the auditors, the stakeholders, the shareholders, the listed companies. And when we feel that a lot of maybe the same questions come several times, it means that there is a gap. We're all here at the end, and I have mentioned it previously. We're all here to improve the market and the quality of the market. When the listed companies are much more solid and they have a clear direction, a clear vision, a clear policies and procedures, it means that the listed company, it will be solid for any crisis that will be happening in the future. of course, in collaboration with the first and the second and the third layer of defense. Of course, the auditors are the external auditors, the internal auditors, the internal control are the layers of the defense for the company. So to make it much more stronger, we need to invest much more in the internal control as a listed company. If and like when Rajiv, what he mentioned that I think it was 9 points. It's supposed you'll be implementing all of these points, and this is the right thing. If you are implementing these points from the beginning, such as the internal audit, internal control, the reporting system, and so on, these points will make the company much more stronger and protect every employee in the company. And you'll know the duties of the board of directors, the duties of the employees in the company, and even the CEO. And you can say, for example, if you feel that this is a misuse in the company, you can say this is as per the procedure. We will not be able to do it since we don't have the authority to do it, since the manuals has been mentioned all these details. So it is very important to know your rights, to know the manuals that the company have it, and of course to know the regulation that has been issued. If I'll give you a brief information about the latest changes in the governance, we have added a lot of solid information to explain it much more to the shareholders, to the board of directors, such for an example of some of the changes. And Rajiv mentioned it at the beginning. It's the report, the independent report that will be issued on a yearly basis. This is a new requirement that SCA requested from the audit committee. A lot of investors, they don't understand what is the duties of the audit committee. And the audit committee is a small committee from the original board of directors. They don't understand that the audit committee, they have a lot of responsibilities. And they have also a commitment, and if there will be a mistake, they'll be also responsible of the job that has been done. Of course, they need to meet with the internal auditor, with the external auditor, and with the other entities. So the internal the audit committee, they have a lot of responsibility, and they need to announce about this report on a yearly basis, and it should be a separate report and signed by the chair of the audit committee. This is one of the changes. The other changes which a lot of you are waiting to know about, it is the internal control. Of course, the internal control and our requirement, it will be a mandatory to have an internal control. Will it be following the COSO requirements? We have mentioned it clearly. We recommend COSO since the COSO requirements are really clear in the market. But if they have any other suggestion, we can hear from them. But it should be a solid reference to be starting and doing it. Beside that, the internal control report and the auditor should have his opinion in it. It's a mandatory to be done, and it should be reported in a yearly basis after the General Assembly, within the annual report. Of course, some companies, they will say that we are not ready to implement, and this may take some time. If the listed companies are following the rules from the beginning, they will not face this problem. All the information that should be disclosed are available within the company, and just they need to gather the information and put it in one report. What should be mentioned through the report? We're here not to find mistakes from the listed companies. We're here to make the listed companies much more stronger. So what will be mentioned, it should be written as the international standards. But at the same time, if something the listed company, they feel that they can't include it, they can write it clearly that this information will be updating it later on, or we can write it in the near future based on what is available. Of course, we're here to increase the number of investors in the financial market, to attract the foreigner investors, and to say that the UAE market, they're following the international standards. So this is our requirements to start from now. And if we didn't follow what is happening internationally, this also will be affecting the financial market and will lead us that the people will not be happy with the practices in UAE. So we need to work together. I think uh, someone mentioned regarding the investment, AI, and so on. These investments every company should consider investing on these future, let's say, way of dealing in the company. If you invested in a right way from now, this will be leading you to be happy in the future, to reduce costs in the future. Even gathering information, analyzing the information, and making a proper reporting through using the AI and the other technologies and the systems internally, then this will keep you much more solid and all information will be available. This is a brief about SCA's changes and a brief about the internal control, and the floor also with the others who's with us today in the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohammed. Before I I think there's one question which many of us, including the organizations, are looking to answer. I think one clarity, if you may provide it, or if you have that right now, is about the point saying the auditors may issue an opinion, separate opinion. Are we still on the may, or is it a requirement that they should?
They should. And what we will do this is a session now. This is a session. We'll be sending a circular for all listed companies to make sure what will be requested from them to be done. So everything will be clear through the circular. It will be sent soon, and they need to be preparing themselves.
Thank you, Mohammed. I know that this is not formal. There will be circular which formalize what you've shared. Maybe one leading question from that the auditor's responsibility, and I'm trying to interpret what I heard you're saying. You're not templatizing a report format for the auditors right now. If you want to probably because what I really liked what you said, as long as you are demonstrating to the auditors what exists, what does not exist, but maybe to hear from you what format in which the auditors should be reporting.
First of all, maybe I'll give you a story, a successful story of implementing corporate governance. 15 years back when I joined SCA, we started implementing the corporate governance through the listed companies. So I remember through 2018 and 2019, listed companies, they don't believe about corporate governance and they don't believe how to implement it. And they feel that this is misuse of resources, misuse of information, and it will take so long to implement it. So we started with them step by step by explaining to them how do they do it, and if we found any missing information that they need to improve it, they'll be doing it we'll be requesting from them to implement it and how to do it. By the end of 2010 or 2010, all listed companies implemented the corporate governance. And now, since we're improving the corporate governance on a yearly basis, they're familiar with our requirements, and you can see even the annual reports. There is a part regarding the corporate governance report, and these information, they know what is requested from them to do it, and the shareholders, they understand the value of this information. This is a story of this is let's say it's a chapter, an old chapter, and we're having now a new chapter regarding the internal control. Maybe the same thinking of the listed companies, that this is let's say they feel it's very heavy thing to do it, or it's a very difficult thing to do it. But after certain time, they will know that they're doing the right thing and they're doing something to benefit the company. And they'll see within the next couple of years will know that this is a very important task, and this protected the company from a lot of misuse, and information are publicly available. Um, an example regarding maybe the corporate governance, maybe regarding the board of directors, delegations, and sometimes they don't give the delegation to the CEO, and the CEO he was taking some actions, for example, and these actions may sometimes maybe the board center change, the board are changing. So if the new board found that there is no power of authority to the CEO, they may sue him. It's the same thing with the internal control. We should think that there is something has been done to protect the company. And we'll know, see, this is a real example of the corporate governance. We'll know about the internal control in the near future.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mohammed. This is the story is good, and I think dovetails very a segue into a question I want to ask Louisa. In fact, just to summarize what I heard, echoing that, I think the three things Mohammed, I heard you say. It's a journey. It's a journey, so we have to accept it's a process. We have to journey. And second most important thing, I think you said, we are all in this together. So I think as much as the company, but regulators are partnering. So it's a partnering approach. And I think the third, and for me, the most important point from a company point, all of this is being done not just for improving the confidence and the stakeholders, but the companies are going to benefit. So think beyond the documentation. And maybe, as I said, Louisa, I wanted to understand because it's not new. These regulations are not new. You've seen this, how globally companies have embarked on this journey. So maybe from your experience, if you can narrate a journey or a guidance to the companies in the UAE from your experiences globally on the ICOFAR implementation.
Thank you, Rajit. And hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I love how you mentioned that it is a journey that we are all together on this. And this is also one of my guidance when you are starting this journey. You know, it is a big weight that you need to lift. That is no doubt about that. Just to begin with, and also mentioning what Nigar pointed out at the beginning, align with your external auditors from the beginning. This is very important. This is crucial. And remember, and again, how you said, we are all in this together. My guidance will be take the time to set the scene. You know, this pays off. And what do I mean by setting the scene? Think about the target operating model of your internal controls. How are the roles and responsibility distributed? What are the skill sets that you need within your internal control department? And how are you covering the different geographies, the different processes, thinking that you had a group probably well established in the company, which was dealing with internal control over financial reporting, and now the scope is broader. How do you slide that big elephant, right? So do a proper risk assessment. This will help companies to focus on the things that really matter, on the material areas from a financial perspective, but also those areas that are not necessarily financial reporting relevant, but have a great impact on the achievements of the company's objective. So internal control is broad, and there is a traditional focus on financial reporting. And this is what I believe most of the companies in the UAE and also globally are very familiar with. And however, the internal control also covers compliance, operation, strategy. And that's why it makes sense to align your internal control with your risk management framework. When you think about your scope of internal control, you need to think about also consider those risks that have a high impact and also high probability of occurrence, and then align that with your internal control framework to cover the risk. And as Nigar mentioned, you know, start with your entity level, and this will, with a strong entity level, because this will reduce the scope of business process and IT application or ITGC controls. And last but not least, you know, something that is very important, do not forget IT. The broader the internal control scope is, the and also is your IT landscape. This will increase, and from my experience, you cannot separate the IT risk assessment from the rest, and also consider IT all the way on your journey from top down.
Thank you, Lisa. I think this is actually a good way you concluded. In fact, one thing which I wanted, because this will be a new area of domain. As I said, it's been predominantly financial reporting, non-financial first time, and IT is so embedded in the business. And I think this is a question which, Mohammed, you also touched in AI. This is a question I want to go back to Sudhir on AI. But before that, how Luisa, in your experience, how are companies dealing with IT controls in non-financial areas? Because financial, everybody is dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad, Raju, that you're asking that. This is certainly a challenge for a lot of companies which are facing at the moment, also in Europe and the rest of the Western world, especially in the light of the ESG regulation. So the IT landscape has increased significantly. And when we think about companies where the financial reporting IT environment was already complex with different systems, applications, talking or interacting with each other, the new regulation that increases the scope of internal controls add more system and application to this already complex landscape. So of course, here you need to think about a risk-based approach. You will hear me a lot talking about risk-based approach because we cannot document or cover absolutely everything. So we need to tackle the most important things. So some of the legacy or the old applications will be difficult to place a control framework around them. And it's also very costly to think about replacing everything at once, with a probably integrated IT solution. This might be the answer, or this will be certainly the answer in a short or long term in many cases, but we all know that this journey, this transformation is a lengthy process. So in the meantime, and very tactical, companies have to increase their scope of their ITGC framework to obviously add new applications where the key non-financial information is being processed and reported. Other systems or applications where the non-financial data resides, implementing controls over system access or system operations might be complex. So in that case, I have seen that some manual controls over the information going into this system, the processing of that information, and obviously the output to ensure completeness and accuracy of the data are being put in place. So there is a kind of interim solution to add more process level control over the data flowing through those systems and applications where it's not possible to restrict the access, for instance. So we are kind of on a journey with some middle steps, which I think we need to basically consider.
I think thanks, Lisa, and maybe as I said, clearly this shows how important technology is, and I think we cannot ignore technology. In fact, cannot be technology before anything else now. And I think, Mohammed, you raised this point, and I want to direct this question to Sudhir. We talked about AI, we talked about technology. This is all enabling technology for the businesses. So we did touch upon that, but can you throw some light as to how new technology of artificial intelligence or robotics is going to help evolve internal controls?
Sure. Thank you, Rajiv. And I think I'll just quickly come to where we are now. Company started this journey several years back, particularly in Abu Dhabi, post-ADA. They started investing heavily in terms of creating that internal controls function. And during that process, actually, they looked at ELCs having standardized governance at the top. Then you looked at very clearly setting up procedures for testing. So they invested the entire life cycle of internal controls. There were a lot of investments. And where entities are today, actually, they are very strongly comfortable with the process they adopt, including the data that is being generated from different systems. That allows entities to really look beyond and see how you can utilize data for better coverage and use of technologies such as AI. And just to give you an example, actually, if you see as businesses are getting complex within an entity as well, you have internal controls, you have ERM, you have HSC, you have compliance, all looking at risks and controls in a different manner. So using technology, you can really look at how to unify controls. AI can play a big role in terms of establishing the right control descriptions that can be applied by different stakeholders so that you have one view on key controls which can be tested and reported on. So there are tools available where you could do the planning in such a manner where you can standardize controls across business processes, different systems, and this can be used. But to achieve that state, you need to be fundamentally having strong foundations to demonstrate that we have the right data quality, governance, so as to allow use of AI. So that is happening. We are seeing that companies have reached, some of those entities whom we are working with have reached that maturity where they started to test and evaluate how AI can support the planning process, for example. We will come into a scenario where you will use AI for testing as well. And that is also, we have seen that particularly for accounting areas, revenues, there's a lot of data available and you can use AI to support some of those tests that can be performed. But I think it's a journey. Companies are reaching that maturity slowly. But I think at this point in time, over the I would say next 12 to 18 months, you would see that companies are adopting technologies through the entire life cycle of internal controls.
Thanks, Sudhir. I think we have used the word journey, and I think if we had AI running on this webinar, we should have counted how many times we've used the word journey and partnership. And maybe I'll now go to Richard, who's feeling why Rajiv is not putting questions. So I think Richard, you were amongst you signed the first internal opinion when the ADA came, if I may be right in saying that. So you actually from 17 onwards have seen the journey in the UAE.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
So I think it will be good for many of those who have to embark on this journey. Maybe if you can paint or take them through the journey briefly. Obviously, as I said, we have got 10 minutes. Brief the journey, talking about your experiences because they were in the same boat as many of the companies would be today.
Yeah, great question, and I see some of it on the chat as well. So thank you for that to the participants. I mean, it is a journey. So another tick mark. I think what was really good and what I've really been impressed by SCA, and thank you, Mohammed Junaid, in terms of your time, etc., is this is about partnering, and actually they recognise that tomorrow everything is not going to be fixed. And I think there is so much seismic change going over at the moment, especially with technology. I absolutely agree with Sudhir. AI is going to kind of really revolutionize what we do over the next few years. ADA was interesting. We had far less time. By the time people woke up to this was about October. And it was that December that we were issuing a first opinion. And I think there was only one, possibly two in the market. I signed off the first one. And again, it's to Mohammed's point, and I loved the point. Well, you should have been doing this anyway. You should have. Actually, that player in the Abu Dhabi market is a very large player, and therefore it would have been expected to be in that space. It took several years for other companies to get to that level. There is a big documentation piece. It was very much focused on financial reporting. It was seen probably as a something put upon companies to begin with. I think that has now changed. I think people do see the benefit. What is really key, and it comes back to the risk assessment that Louisa mentioned, whether it's internal control over financial reporting, whether it's just internal controls generally. And this is why I think absolutely you need the stakeholders, whether it's internal audit, whether it's external audit, whether it's the strategy team, whether it's the chief executive, whether it's the audit committee and board. You need to basically really focus laser sharp early on the things that critically matter. Perhaps the following year, and you may have to take some shortcuts. Maybe you don't do so much IT testing. Maybe you have to outsource that to the third party in the first year. But be laser focused on what you need in the first year and then show a journey of how you're going to improve thereafter. This is a multi-year journey. Anybody who thinks they can do this in 6 months, good luck. Never seen it before. I think this is at least 3 years, and I think it is about that iterative approach about getting better every time. It's Kaizen in a Japanese setting, which is when I first kind of involved with SOX. So genuinely, don't worry. I think I would hope that your auditor and the regulator, if you're sitting here as a company, I would hope that you would feel comfort that if you can show a journey of where you're trying to head to, that you would have confidence that you are not going to get smacked because you're not moving fast enough. The people who, how shall I put it, got a slap on the wrists in Abu Dhabi were the ones who basically could not show and did not want to show sometimes that they were actually committed to this journey.
So thanks, Richard. I am very conscious we've got 4 minutes, and may I request the panel for 1 or 2 more minutes. I just have 3 other questions, and I'm probably before I ask the 3 questions to make sure we wrap this on time. I just want to leave for people who may leave at 12 that all these questions, we have picked up a few from the audiences as well. Every question which I had, which the audience have, will get answered. So we will provide access to your questions if they don't get picked up today. Will get access to you. We are opening a website where all these questions will get answered. But our commitment to you, the next 2 weeks time, we will have all these questions answered, sent back to you in a common place, because these are not private. These are all open questions which applies to all. So Richard, one question, and maybe briefly, as I said, I want to cover 3 or 4 in the next available 5 odd minutes. SCA has recommended COSO, and because we know COSO is more widely accepted, but SCA, as Mohammed also suggested, you're open to use. So I know ADA did not come up with any recommendations when they came. They also later on preferred. How would you advise companies to do? Should they pick up COSO, or should they go ahead, pick up any of the frameworks?
I mean, I think, again, it's because of the journey. I would say my end goal is COSO or one of the other accredited places. In truth, I think COSO stands out from my experience. So I would absolutely use COSO. Can you do COSO overnight? Again, good luck. I think it's showing the journey. What are the key elements of COSO? It's, again, sorry, Louisa, coming back, it's the risk assessment. What's really critical? And if you don't do it this year, what are you going to do next year? And what's actually third year, etc.
Thank you, Richard, for being brief. And I probably this question before Mohammed, the number of people who asked this question, are there more clarification or regulations coming through? Because you did mention, so one question which I definitely want to cover from the audience is, are there more regulation or clarifications coming along?
If we feel that something wasn't clear, a lot of questions, and I have mentioned it before, when we feel that there is a gap, either we change the regulation to clear it up much more, or a circular to clear it for the listed companies of the way of implementation, for example, of a way of doing the right thing. One of the question, it was an interesting question, to say the truth. They wrote, do you have a template to implement, and the report, how to implement the report? If the regulator didn't requested a template from you, why do you ask about a template? If the regulator make your life much easier, you want to have a template and some points that you may not be able to implement it. So think about it in this way.
Thank you, Ahmed. Last 2 questions, as I'm very conscious about the time. Sudhir, one question to you, and then final to Louisa, to make sure that, and maybe we'll ask one question. Negash is on the screen. Maybe we'll go with the third question as well. So Sudhir, one question which has again come, and this is the confusion we keep hearing: who should be the owner of this project? Should it be finance? Should it be internal audit? So any thoughts and ideas on that, or guidance?
So I think I will pick up something which I got from my colleague from UK. He said the second line is not second line, it's 5 now. So you will see right now internal controls is reporting within finance, You will have compliance reporting into legal. So it is actually, again, I'll use the term Richard journey, where you will really have a real second line. And I think most of the companies are maturing into that role where in a very good manner, where they have invested heavily and they know that the internal controls unit is actually up to that mark where it can stand on its own. So I think coming back to your question on who is responsible, an independent internal control unit would be the ideal unit to be responsible for the implementation. But more from a governance point of view, Rajiv, it is, I know the governance committee has been mandated, and what we have seen based on our experience is that the board secretary or the governance function within an organization plays that critical role where they really help in assisting the entire implementation of overall the governance code per se. But when it comes to internal controls matter, I think it's largely the internal controls unit.
And as I said, I probably the final question, Lisa, to you. We've heard lots about. I think I want to relate 2 points which we heard, and I think rightfully so. Richard and Mohammed both talked. You have to have all of this being done, but still, why are we talking about it? Does it mean there's more work? And I think Nigar also talked more documentation. This is all about documentation, or much more than that.
It is a mindset change, Rajit. I think that it is documentation, yes, it is more transparency. I would put it this way, because when we say documentation, it has a negative effect. People immediately think about, oh my God, you are not trusting me, so I have to write everything that I'm doing. So I will say it's more transparency and it's a mindset change. Which has to happen, as part of this journey. Again, one more point to the journey word. And I think that this is something that we all need to get on board with that. There is a lot of learning involved in the organization, a lot of training and upskilling certain resources. I think that naturally, going back to your point about where does this responsibility reside, I can give you the experience from Europe. This traditionally, and because of the finance department has a lot of experience with auditing, with reporting, it tends to go that way. However, the lines is not clear, and the interaction with the legal department, the interaction with the quality department is there. But again, this is all part of a mindset change to make sure that we are skilling up the level on the organization around reporting, around transparency.
No, I think, Luisa, you really summarized this very well, and this is a great learning I took away, the mindset. It's not about documentation and mindset. I think that's a very well way to kind of sum this session. Trust me, I had about 20 questions, and I have received at least in front of me about another 20. I'm sure if time permitted, we could have gone for another 2 hours with clarification. And at least I realized through this process, there's so much to learn. As I said, these questions only make you think and reflect approaches. But the important thing is partnership. And as I committed to the audience, we will make sure these questions get answered and are delivered to you. First, we'll obviously share the presentation. One question was, we'll send replies. But what we are also doing is we are creating a portal where you can keep asking us questions. So we don't need to be creating a formal forums like this. So I think the portal which we are setting up will make sure that questions get answered, and wherever we can answer, we'll do. And Mohammed, wherever we don't have the question, maybe we feed these questions back to you. These are also concerns or questions, and we've always are really elated by the support we are getting from SCA in this part. And maybe to conclude, this presentation will be shared, and if I request Shivam to show the last slide. We have developed a short video animation of not what we are talking to, but something which is easy to assimilate from an SCA regulation perspective. You can scan this barcode. As I said, this presentation will be made. You can download this video, socialize with your team. It, in some brief 4 to 5 minutes, describes some of the requirements, keeping a company in mind. So with a company mindset, this video has been developed. So On that note, again, thank you very much, the panel members. Really, really the insightful inputs. Thank you, Mohammed, Louisa, Richard, Sudhir, Nigar, and thank you to all the audiences who have taken the time off. And now many of you may be going on holidays, so happy holidays and summer breaks to all of you. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
How did it go?